and the son's legs didn't move. And they had a daughter, maybe 11 years old, and she sat next to them, and the family sat together, and they were waiting. And my kids were looking over at this little boy, and the only way I can describe him is, you remember the old Paul Winchell and the dummies, the ventriloquist? You don't remember that? Paula, you're in church. But this little boy's legs didn't move at all. They were just sort of dangling there. And so my kids were looking at him, and of course they started asking questions. Dad, what's wrong with his legs? Well, I don't know. Well, will he ever walk, Dad? Well, I don't know. It doesn't look like he can move his legs at all. At any rate, very shortly, the little boy is elbowing his parents and pointing down to the front. And this little boy wanted to go and sit in the front. And so you can imagine all the reasons why. Well, the wheelchair, we couldn't take the wheelchair down there, and because it was stairs, actually. And the boy was more persistent about it. He wanted to sit closer. And the parents had very good reasons, of course, probably more creative than mine, about why they couldn't move. So now the little boy reaches forward in the seats and grabs a hold of the one in front of him and pulls himself onto the seat in front of his parents. And his legs just drag over the bench, and then he turns around and faces. And he was waiting, of course. And so my kids are watching this, glued to this scene. Now the boy moves up another bench. Now he's 2 benches in front of his parents. Now, believe me, there's at least 20 benches down to the front. More than that, probably. And the parents start looking at each other, and you know what the parents are thinking? What are we going to do? Should we bring him back here? We told him to sit here, but he's down there. So now the kid moves like 3 or 4 benches. He keeps going. And he's kind of looking around him on both sides, wondering, well, when are they coming for me? And my kids are looking at me like, is he being disobedient? Is he being a bad boy, Dad? Finally, the kid keeps moving. And now he moves, banging those legs, dragging his legs, really, all the way down to the front row. He knows he's won. The parents are completely dumbfounded. They're paralyzed like deer in the headlights, They don't know what to do. The kid's all the way down in the front. Now the sister... So they say, go ahead. So the sister runs down. And my kids look at us and say, well, okay, fine. So now they're all sitting together. My 4 kids, these 2 other kids who we didn't know, they're sitting together in the front row, and they immediately start talking to each other. Now, I don't know what they said to each other. I don't know if they asked the little boy, what's wrong with your legs? What happened? All these kinds of things. But these 6 kids are sitting in the front row. They're laughing. They're having a great time. The guy jumps in the water. They get soaked. Really hot day. Of course, that was the smartest place to sit. Only dumb parents sit way up at the top, closer to the sun, even though I said it was cooler up there. It wasn't any cooler. And these kids were having a great time. Then time comes, and Dad picks up the wheelchair, and it was a little wheelchair for a 7-year-old kid. He probably looked like he weighed not even 50 pounds. And he carries it down and put the kid in the wheelchair, and off they went, and my kids came back and said, you should have seen that guy, Dad. It was great. The great thing wasn't the diver. The great thing was that little kid. What must go through that kid's mind, My legs don't work. He sees a world around him of children running and playing, and thinks about sports maybe and all these other things. I wonder if he'd ever been told that he's never going to run. Or maybe he'd been told, well, we'll have to see. Operations can happen and maybe changes can take place. It didn't look like that kind of a situation to me. Children are always a very powerful lesson if those of us who are grown-up children will observe and pay attention to what they're doing and what they're saying and try to figure out what they're thinking. And Jesus often uses children in illustrations, and he did in the gospel lesson. The children are running around the marketplace playing and inviting others to play in their game. Jesus is illustrating the way people had received, in fact, the lessons that they had heard from John the Baptist, the weird one who came out of the wilderness, and from Jesus himself about God. And he uses the children to explain this. Because the people, when they heard John the Baptist, they heard something about religion they had never heard before. And then when Jesus came along, the story continued, and most people were dumbfounded by what he was saying. It's unfortunate that we sit in church with these lessons, and we've heard these lessons over and over again, and some of them even more familiar, and your mind drifts off, and you're thinking about all the things you have to do. But at the moment that these lessons were spoken to people, they were shocking, they were surprising. They'd never heard them before. And they'd never heard religious people speak the way Jesus spoke. John the Baptist was symbolized when the children sang, "We sang a dirge for you, and you did not mourn." That was representative of John the Baptist. The kids were saying, "Let's play funeral." Now, we think that's kind of funny, you know. Let's play funeral. Let's play, what did you play? Cowboys and Indians? Cops and robbers? All kinds of various games, jump rope games. But these were games that children played in the street, pretend games. They were the same games that we have played ourselves. Maybe the themes are a bit different, but that's what the children were saying. "We sang a dirge for you, and you did not mourn." You didn't pretend it was a funeral. These were scenes that people saw in the street. You know, we have a funeral that passes by, but it's all in very formal cars, and there's nothing like... Have any of you seen the funerals down in New Orleans, the jazz funerals? Where people go down the street and they kind of dance along with the procession, and they walk to the cemeteries, and there's a lot of music, and one of the songs that we sing quite often is Jesus on the Main Line, "Tell Him What You Want," is a funeral song. It's a song that people sang at a funeral. Saying, give up your grief to Jesus. Pray to Jesus about this situation. So that's what they were doing. Kids saw this in the street, and they turned it into a game. And the funeral game reminded Jesus of how people thought about John the Baptist. John the Baptist comes with these terrible demands and says things that we all love to hear, like repent. One of our favorite words. Repent. Or otherwise, you're going to get it. That's kind of the way he put it. That's a little bit of a loose translation, not based on the Greek, but at any rate, that's what he was essentially saying to people. And it seemed to them, to the religious people of the time, that John put the most terrible demands on people. You have to do this. You have to get in touch with God. You have to be baptized, all these things. This was the teaching of John the Baptist, at least in the way the religious people saw it. And he was continually challenging their ideas of what society should be like. And he was telling them that your religion has become a heavy burden on people instead of a hope for the future. They didn't believe him, of course. Not the religious people. And John seemed to be saying that God was an angry God, that God had laws and tests which had to be passed, and that all these laws and tests were administered by the temple people, by the priests in the temple. You know, God is testing you. Let's see how you can do. They did this with money also, of course. You know, if you were really faithful, you'd give more money into the temple treasury. This was one of the things that they were saying. This was an idea we talked about a little bit in the study of Revelation on Wednesday night. The idea of the book of life comes up. And some of you learned this in Sunday school or somewhere along the line. Maybe you had a member of your family who believed this, that God has this big book. And you have a page in this book. So you turn the page, Tammy. Checks, little gold stars, a couple of question marks. And boy, those gold stars better go add up to more than the black marks, the checks, or whatever you'd want to call them. And that book of life idea is spread around by a lot of people. Some people say, when your time is up, you know, like it's in the book. God knows when you're going to die. God turns the book and says, well, you better finish painting that garage, Joe, because you got about 6 hours, and that's it.